I did it on purpose. That's the part I keep coming back to. The part that makes my stomach turn even now, days later, when I'm standing in my kitchen trying to pretend my life hasn't completely shifted beneath my feet. I did it on purpose, and I knew exactly what I was doing when I did it. But let me back up. My name is Hannah, and 3 months ago I was nobody. I mean that in the most literal, ordinary way possible. I was a 29-year-old events coordinator working for a mid-size hospitality company in Chicago. The kind of job where you spend most of your day making sure other people's nights go perfectly while you go home alone and microwave leftovers. I was good at it. The invisible kind of good, where your name only comes up when something goes wrong. I made sure it never did. That was how I ended up at the Meridian. The Meridian wasn't the kind of venue my company usually handled. It sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the West Loop, all dark marble and low lighting, and the specific kind of silence that money buys. My supervisor, Denise, had called me into her office on a Tuesday morning with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a look on her face like she was handing me a live grenade. "The client requested someone discreet," she said. "I told them you were the most invisible person I've ever employed. I meant it as a compliment." I didn't ask what kind of event it was. I'd learned that the less you asked, the smoother things went. I showed up that Thursday evening with my tablet, my earpiece, and my usual black dress that disappeared into any room. The event was a private dinner, 40 guests, invitation only. The kind of gathering where the security at the elevator outnumbered the waitstaff. I noticed Youngji before I understood what he was. He was standing near the far window when I arrived to do my final walkthrough, still 2 hours before guests. Just standing there, looking out at the city like it owed him something. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'11", but there was a quality to the way he occupied space that made the room feel smaller. He wore a black suit with the top button of his shirt open, and I could see the edge of a tattoo crawling up the side of his neck, dark and intricate against his skin. His hair was pushed back from his face in a way that looked careless, but probably wasn't. I almost didn't notice the 2 men standing 6 feet behind him, until one of them shifted his weight, and I caught the outline of something under his jacket. I looked back at my tablet. Fast. Okay, Hannah. Just do your job. One of the venue managers, a nervous man named Patrick, who I'd worked with twice before, appeared at my elbow so quickly I nearly dropped my earpiece. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said, and then lowered his voice to something barely above a breath. "Just don't make eye contact unless he speaks to you first. And if he asks you something, answer short. Don't offer information." I stared at him. "Patrick, who is that?" He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Someone whose name you don't need to know tonight." I found out anyway. Not that night, but eventually. You always find out. When you work enough events in this city. His name moved through certain circles the way weather moves. You didn't always see it coming, but you felt the pressure change before it arrived. Youngjae Han, 28 years old. Born in Seoul, raised partly in Los Angeles, operating now out of Chicago with a legitimate real estate portfolio that nobody talked about, and an illegitimate network that everybody whispered about. He was the kind of man who had layers of insulation between himself and anything that could be proven, and he moved through the city's upper half with a quietness that made people nervous, precisely because they couldn't point to why. I didn't know all of that on that first Thursday. I just knew that when he turned from the window and looked across the room and his eyes landed on me, not through me, not past me, but on me, with this flat, assessing quality that made my whole body go still. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. I hated it immediately. The dinner went smoothly. I kept to the edges, adjusted lighting cues, managed a small crisis in the kitchen involving a fish course that arrived 15 minutes behind schedule, and generally did what I always did, which was make everything look effortless while quietly sweating through it. Youngji sat at the head of the table and barely spoke. When he did, people leaned in. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Around 10 o'clock, I was standing near the service corridor checking my notes when I heard footsteps that didn't sound like waitstaff. Too measured, too deliberate. I looked up. He was maybe 4 feet away, and he stopped when he saw me notice him. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize for appearing out of nowhere in a hallway. He just looked at me for a moment the way you'd look at a painting you weren't sure you understood yet. "You fixed the timing issue in the kitchen," he said. It wasn't a question. I kept my face neutral. It was nothing. Part of the job. He tilted his head, just barely. "Patrick said you'd say something like that." I didn't know what to do with that, so I said nothing. He seemed to respect it. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that isn't really an acknowledgement but is somehow more than one. And then he walked past me toward the elevator bank, his security folding in behind him like water closing around a stone. I stood in that corridor for about 30 seconds after he was gone, just breathing. That was the first night. The second time was 3 weeks later, different venue, same careful silence. Then a third. And somewhere between the third and fourth events, I stopped pretending to myself that the assignments were random. Denise kept handing them to me with that same pressed lip expression, and I kept taking them without asking questions, and each time I walked into a room where Youngji Han was the gravitational center, I told myself I was just doing my job. By the 7th event, he knew my name, not because I told him. I know that much. I never volunteered anything. I kept Patrick's advice lodged somewhere cautious in the back of my mind, even after I'd stopped being afraid of the men in tailored jackets standing at the edges of every room. But one evening in early April, just as I was coordinating the breakdown of a private reception at a hotel in the Gold Coast, he walked past me and said, quietly and without stopping, "Good work tonight, Hannah." My full name, in his voice, with that particular flatness that somehow carried weight anyway. I didn't sleep well that night. The feelings came gradually, the way most inconvenient things do, not in a rush but in degrees, small enough each time that I could talk myself out of naming them. The way I started arriving 10 minutes earlier to events I knew he'd be attending. The way I found myself tracking him across a room without meaning to, cataloging the small ways his expression shifted when he was considering something. The way the muscle in his jaw tightened when someone said something he didn't like. The way he held his glass, loose, unhurried, like tension was something he'd decided not to carry in his hands. I was an intelligent woman. I had a graduate degree, a good apartment, a sensible life. I knew exactly what kind of man young Jaehan was, or at least I knew enough to understand the shape of it. I knew the men around him weren't there for his safety alone. I knew that the conversations he had in quiet corners of expensive rooms weren't about real estate. I knew that the particular quality of stillness he carried wasn't peace, it was control. I knew all of that. And somewhere around the 8th event, standing in a dim hallway with the distant sound of a string quartet behind me, I realized that knowing it wasn't the same as not wanting to be close to it. That was the thought I couldn't put back once I'd had it. Like a door I'd pushed open just slightly, and now the draft was coming through whether I wanted it or not. I didn't act on it. I want to be clear about that. I kept my professionalism like armor, kept my answers short, kept my eyes on my tablet and my mind on the work. But something had shifted, quiet and irrevocable, and I think some part of me understood. Even then, before the dinner at the Sterling, before Marcus Seo, before I did the thing I did on purpose and set everything in motion, that I had already crossed some invisible line. I just hadn't figured out yet what it was going to cost me. The Sterling was the kind of restaurant that didn't need to advertise. No sign out front, just a brushed steel door on a quiet street in River North, and a reservation list that supposedly ran 6 months out. Unless you were the kind of person who didn't wait for lists. I'd coordinated 3 events there before. I knew the layout. I knew the head chef's particular anxieties about plating sequence, and I knew that the private dining room in the back, separated from the main floor by a frosted glass partition and its own dedicated entrance, was where the evenings that mattered actually happened. It was a Saturday in late April when Denise called me about the Sterling, and something in her voice was different this time. Flatter. More careful. "The client specifically requested you," she said. I was standing in my apartment, still in the oversized t-shirt I'd slept in, holding a mug of coffee with both hands. "Specifically?" "By name, Hannah." A pause. "I need you to understand that this client is important to the company, to several of our ongoing relationships." "I understand. Do you?" Another pause, longer. "Because I'm also going to say this once and not repeat it. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, you call me. Not after, during." I set my coffee down. "Denise, what aren't you telling me?" She exhaled slowly. "Just be professional. You're always professional. That's why I'm sending you." I arrived at the Sterling at 6:15, 45 minutes before the guests. The private room had been configured for 12, a long table, low floral arrangements in deep burgundy. Candlelight kept deliberately dim. Young Jay's events always had that quality, like someone had thought carefully about shadow. I did my walkthrough, spoke with the sommelier about the pour sequence, confirmed the kitchen timing with the chef, and then stood near the side wall, going over my notes while the room settled into its pre-event stillness. When the first guests began arriving at 7, I noticed something was different. The usual configuration was consistent. Young Jay's people on one side, whoever he was meeting with on the other, the whole thing conducted with the kind of surface civility that stretched thin over something harder underneath. But tonight, the energy in the room had a different texture, tighter. The men who came in first weren't his. I could tell by the way his security team, already stationed at the door, went very still when they entered. And then Marcus Seo walked in. I didn't know his name yet. I just saw him, maybe 35, broad-shouldered in a charcoal suit, with the particular ease of a man who had never once doubted that he was welcome anywhere he walked. He had a smile that arrived before the rest of him, warm and deliberate, and he spoke to the room in a way that filled it. Where Young Jay contracted space, this man expanded into it. Young Jay came in 6 minutes later. The two men looked at each other across the table with the specific neutrality of people who had not been friends for a long time. They shook hands. They sat down. The evening began. I kept to the edges. That was my job. I moved through the room like furniture, adjusting things quietly, communicating with the kitchen through my earpiece, making sure glasses stayed full and the rhythm of courses didn't break. I was good at this, the disappearing act. I'd spent years perfecting it, but I felt Young Jay's eyes on me twice during the first hour. Not long. Just the brief, passing weight of attention, like a hand resting on a surface for a moment before lifting. I didn't look up either time. It was during the third course that Marcus Seo looked up from his conversation and found me instead. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was easy and warm, in a way that made the word feel like an invitation, rather than an interruption. "Could I get still water instead?" "Of course." I moved to the sidebar, poured, brought it over. When I set the glass down, he looked up at me with that ready smile and said, "Thank you. I don't think I caught your name." "Hannah," I said. Reflex. I always gave my name when asked. It was part of the service. "Hannah." He said it back like he was tasting it. "You've been here all evening and I didn't even notice. You're very good at that." It was a small thing. A nothing comment, really. The kind of thing people in rooms like this said without thinking. I smiled back. Professionally, briefly, the kind of smile that was really just good manners, and said, "That's the goal," and went back to the wall. I wasn't looking at Youngji when it happened. But I felt it. The temperature in the room didn't change. His posture didn't change. He was still in the middle of a low exchange with the man to his left, still holding his glass with that untroubled looseness. But something had shifted, faint and atmospheric, like the way the air feels right before a storm, when there's not a cloud in the sky yet. Something had entered the room that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I looked at him then, because I couldn't help it. His eyes were already on me, not with anything I could name cleanly. Not anger, not warning. Something more contained than either of those. A stillness within the stillness, like a depth you couldn't see the bottom of. He held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds. I counted, stupidly, the way you count things when you're nervous. And then he looked back at the man he was speaking with, and the conversation resumed. My heart was going too fast. I looked down at my tablet and read the same line 4 times. The dinner ended at 10:30. Guests filtered out in the measured, unhurried way of people who had nowhere pressing to be. Marcus Co. left with 2 of his men, and his warm energy went with him, and the room exhaled slightly without it. I was managing the breakdown logistics with the Sterling's floor manager when I heard Patrick, who had appeared at some point in the last hour, as he always seemed to near the end of these events, say my name quietly from behind me. He wants a word. I turned. Patrick was already looking at the floor, which told me everything about how much he wanted to be part of whatever came next. Youngji was standing near the frosted glass partition with one hand in his jacket pocket. His security had pulled back to the door. Still there, always there, but giving the particular distance that I'd come to recognize as deliberate. A calculated privacy. I crossed the room toward him. I kept my expression neutral. I was good at that, usually. He waited until I was close enough that we didn't need to raise our voices. Then he said, "How long have you worked events like this?" I blinked. Of all the things I'd braced for, that wasn't it. About 4 years. He nodded slowly, looking at me with that considering quality. You notice things other people miss. I try to stay observant. It's useful for the job. Yes, he said. And there was something in the single word that suggested he was agreeing with something larger than what I'd said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Marcus Co. Did he say anything of note? I felt the careful weight of the question. He asked for still water and complimented the service. That's all. That's all. Young Jay looked at me for a beat that lasted slightly too long. Not accusing, not warm either. Something in between. The look of a man running a calculation I didn't have all the variables for. You'll be at the reception next Friday, he said. It wasn't framed as a question. If that's what the client requests, yes. Something shifted at the edge of his expression. So small I almost missed it. It is. He turned then and walked toward the exit, his security falling in without a word or signal from him. They just moved, like they were extensions of his intention. I stood near that frosted glass partition and watched him leave and tried to identify what I was feeling. It took me the entire drive home to name it. And when I finally did, alone in my car in the parking garage beneath my building with the engine off and my hands still on the wheel, I sat with it for a long, quiet moment. It felt uncomfortably like belonging to something I hadn't agreed to join. And the worst part? The part I couldn't reason away no matter how many sensible arguments I assembled in the dark of that garage, was that it didn't entirely feel like a bad thing. The Friday reception was at a private estate in Winnetka. I'd driven past houses like that before. The kind that sit back from the road behind iron gates and old trees, where the architecture is understated in the specific way that only extreme wealth can afford to be. But I'd never worked one. The circular driveway alone was longer than my entire street, and the interior, when I was brought through a side entrance by a woman named Gloria, who managed the estate's household staff, smelled like fresh flowers and old money and something else I couldn't name. Possibility, maybe. Or consequence. I arrived at 4. The event was at 8. Those 4 hours were mine, in the way that pre-event time always was. Mine in the sense that nobody was watching yet, that I could move through a space and understand it before it filled up with people and pressure. I walked the main entertaining floor twice, mapped the flow of rooms, confirmed bar placement, checked the caterer's setup in the kitchen, and had a 15-minute conversation with Gloria about the estate owner's specific preferences regarding the temperature of the back terrace. His name was Raymond Choi, 73 years old, and he was, according to the quiet but clear implication of everything Gloria said, the kind of man whose preferences weren't preferences so much as requirements. Mr. Han's people confirmed his arrival for 7:45. Gloria mentioned at one point, sliding it in between 2 logistical details like it was nothing. I wrote something on my tablet that I didn't need to write. Understood. She looked at me for just a half-second longer than necessary, then moved on. The guests began arriving at 8:10. Not late. This was a crowd where 8:10 meant on time. I stationed myself near the main corridor that connected the foyer to the entertaining rooms, the kind of position where you could see everything without being visible in any particular way. I'd gotten good at that geometry. Youngji arrived at 7:48. I watched him come through the main entrance from across the room, and I noticed, the way I always noticed things I tried not to, that Raymond Choi himself walked forward to greet him. Not a handshake and a nod from a distance. An actual crossing of the room, deliberate and unhurried, from an older man who moved like he'd never needed to hurry for anyone. He greeted Youngjae with both hands, and there was something in the gesture that communicated an entire history I wasn't privy to. Youngjae received it with a small bow of his head, and then said something low that made the older man's expression shift into what I could only describe as relief. I filed that away and went back to managing the caterer's timing. The first hour moved smoothly. Champagne, small bites, the ambient murmur of 60 people doing the careful social arithmetic of rooms like this. I circulated without circulating, appearing where needed and disappearing immediately after. At one point I caught Youngjae's gaze from across a room, and he looked away first, which was unusual enough that I thought about it for the next 20 minutes while pretending I wasn't. Marcus Seo arrived at 9:15. He wasn't on the confirmed guest list. I knew, because I had the list. I saw the small recalibration in Gloria's posture when he walked in, the quick look she shot toward Raymond Choi's assistant, and the way one of Youngjae's security team, a tall, quiet man who had been stationed near the back corridor all evening, straightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus moved through the room the same way he had at the Sterling. Warm, easy filling space with a kind of comfortable authority. He was with 2 men I didn't recognize, and a woman in a green dress who laughed at something he said before they'd even cleared the foyer. He made it look effortless, the way some people make everything look effortless, like the room was already his and he was simply returning to it. He found me, before I found a reason to move. Hannah. He said my name like we were old acquaintances, like the single brief exchange at the Sterling 3 weeks ago had built something between us. He had a glass of scotch and a smile that reached his eyes in a way that felt genuine and practiced at the same time. You work all of Raymond's events? I work whatever I'm assigned, I said. Modest. He glanced around the room with the look of a man taking inventory. You did the Sterling event too. I remember. I did. He looked back at me, and there was something in the look, not aggressive, not inappropriate, just present in a way that felt deliberate. You're very good at making yourself part of the room without being in it. Thank you. I meant it as a genuine compliment. He tilted his head slightly. I pay attention to people who pay attention. It's a useful habit in my line of work. I didn't ask what his line of work was. He smiled like he appreciated that. And then, this is the part I have gone back to, the part I have turned over and examined from every angle, trying to understand where the decision actually came from. I smiled back. Not the professional quarter smile I gave the water request at the Sterling. This was fuller. Real. Or real enough. The kind of smile that acknowledges another person as a person. That says I see you seeing me and doesn't immediately retreat from it. I don't know exactly why I did it. I think some part of me had been sitting with the conversation in the parking garage for 3 weeks, with the feeling of belonging to something I hadn't agreed to, with the weight of Young Jae's eyes, and the careful architecture of a situation I had no control over. And something in me needed, maybe, to feel like I had some agency in it, like I could put one piece on the board myself. Marcus Co. smiled back, and it was warm, and it was easy, and it meant absolutely nothing. But I felt it the second it happened. The shift. Not in Marcus. Not in the room. In the specific quality of the air about 15 feet to my left, where Young Jae was standing in a conversation with Raymond Choi and 2 other men, holding a glass of water. Never alcohol, I'd noticed. Never. With his back partially turned to the room. Except that his back was no longer fully turned. He hadn't moved. He wasn't looking at me. But something had changed in the set of his shoulders. Some microscopic adjustment in the way he was positioned that placed me, suddenly and precisely, within his peripheral awareness. Like a door that had been mostly closed and was now slightly open. Marcus was saying something about the venue. I responded with something appropriate. I have no memory of what. Because across the room, Young Jae set his glass down on a nearby surface, carefully, without looking at it, and said something brief to Raymond Choi. The older man nodded, and then Young Jae turned and walked toward the back corridor. Not toward me, away. But one of his security team, the tall, quiet one, drifted very slightly in my direction as he passed. Not close, just present, repositioned, like a piece being moved on a board I couldn't see the full dimensions of. My smile faded. I looked back at Marcus Co. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between amusement and assessment. "Friend of yours?" he asked, with a lightness that wasn't entirely light. "I work his events sometimes," I said. "Same as yours." He took a slow sip of his scotch. "And does he know you smile at his rivals?" The word landed quietly. Rivals, not competition, not colleagues, rivals. I kept my face still. Years of events management had given me a face I could keep still under almost any pressure, and I used all of it right then. "I smile at guests," I said. "It's professional courtesy." Marcus looked at me for a moment longer than was casual. Then that warm smile came back, easy as breathing, and he said, "Of course. Enjoy your evening, Hannah," and moved away into the room. I stood in the corridor and listened to the sound of 60 people talking over chamber music and tried to locate my heartbeat, which seemed to have moved somewhere up near my throat. I had done it on purpose. I could admit that to myself now, in the privacy of my own chest. Not the smile itself, maybe, that had arrived on its own, but the choice not to pull it back. The decision to let Young Jae, who I knew was aware of everything in every room he occupied, see me give something real to the one man in Chicago he would least want to have it. I had wanted to see what would happen. I had wanted for just one moment to be the one who moved first. Standing there in the corridor of Raymond Choi's estate, with my tablet against my ribs and Marcus Co.'s scotch-warm voice still in the air around me, I began to understand that I had made a very significant miscalculation, not because of what Young Jae might do, but because of how much I already cared about what it was. He didn't say anything that night. That was the part that unraveled me the most. Not a confrontation. Not a cold word in a corridor. Not even one of those 2-second looks that I'd learned to read like weather. Nothing. The rest of the Winnetka evening passed with Young Jae absent from the main rooms, and when I finally caught a glimpse of him near the end of the night, he was deep in conversation with Raymond Choi near the back terrace doors, turned completely away from the party, and he didn't look in my direction once. I drove home at midnight telling myself it meant nothing, that I'd imagined the shoulder shift, the repositioned security, the specific quality of absence that followed my smile at Marcus CO. I was an events coordinator. I was reading too much into the body language of a man I barely knew, constructing significance out of small movements because I'd spent too many evenings in rooms with him and started to believe I understood something I didn't. I made tea when I got home. I sat on my couch. I stared at the wall for a while. I didn't sleep until almost 3. 4 days passed. No call from Denise, no new assignment. I had other events. A corporate anniversary dinner in the Loop, a product launch at a gallery space in Pilsen, and I moved through them with my usual efficiency, and I didn't think about young Jae Han, and I was lying to myself so consistently that I'd almost started to believe it. On the 5th day, Denise called. "There's an event Saturday," she said. "Private. The client's usual requirements." I waited. "Hannah." Her voice had that careful flatness again. "He asked for someone else initially, one of the senior coordinators. Then he changed the request back to you." The tea I was making went cold while I stood at the counter not moving. "Changed it back," I repeated. "An hour later, yes." A pause. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a professional and this is your call. But I want you to know that whatever is happening in those rooms, it's above what I can manage from this end. So if you go Saturday, you go with your eyes open." "They've always been open," I said. She made a sound that wasn't quite agreement. "Saturday, 7 o'clock. I'll send the details." The event was at a private members club in the Gold Coast called Ether, not publicly listed, accessible by a single unmarked door on a side street that you had to know to look for. I'd never worked there before. The interior was all dark wood paneling and low-hung pendant lights, the kind of place that felt like it existed slightly outside of time, where the carpets absorbed sound and the staff moved with a practiced invisibility that made my own feel amateur by comparison. I arrived at 5:30. The floor manager, a composed Korean-American woman named Sue, walked me through the space with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by anything. She showed me the main room, the 2 private alcoves, the bar configuration, and then paused near a door at the end of a short hallway. "Mr. Han uses this room for pre-event," she said. "It's not part of your coordination area. You won't need to enter." "Understood." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Then, "He came in an hour ago. He knows you're here." She said it without inflection. I received it the same way. The guests began at 7. Smaller than the previous events, 20, maybe 22. The energy was contained, intentional. This wasn't a dinner party. It was something that looked like one. I had been managing the bar timing for about 40 minutes when Youngjae came through the door of the private hallway and entered the main room. He moved through the space the way he always did, the room adjusting to him rather than the other way around, and took his position near the far end of the bar without sitting, just standing. A glass of water already waiting for him, placed by a bartender who had clearly done this before. For the first 20 minutes, he didn't look at me. I knew, in the way I'd come to know things about him that I had no business knowing, that this was not the same as not being aware of me. Young Jae Han was aware of everything in every room he occupied. The not looking was its own form of communication, and I was fluent enough by now to feel it. I kept working. I adjusted the ambient temperature at Sue's instruction, managed a brief issue with a late catering delivery, and circulated with my usual quiet efficiency. I was fine. I was professional. I was absolutely fine. He came to stand near me at 8:40, not directly beside me. A few feet of space remained between us, maintained with the precise care of a man who understood that proximity was a language. He was looking out at the room, not at me, when he said, quietly, "You've been avoiding this side of the room for the last hour." I kept my eyes on my tablet. I've been covering the areas that needed attention. The bar hasn't needed attention in 40 minutes. I said nothing. There wasn't anything to say to that. A moment passed. The ambient conversation of 20 people hummed around us and seemed somehow very far away. "Marcus Co," he said, still looking at the room. Still that same flat, contained tone. "What do you know about him?" I felt the careful weight of the question. The same architecture as the one after the Sterling. Not direct, never direct, approaching the thing from a sideways angle that made it harder to brace against. "I know he was at the Sterling and at Winnetka," I said. "I know you didn't invite him to either." A beat. "What did he say to you Saturday?" "He commented on the venue. He remembered my name from the Sterling." I paused. "He called you rivals." Something shifted in Youngji's expression. So small. A fractional tightening around the eyes. "He said that to you directly?" "Yes." "And you smiled at him anyway?" It landed without accusation. That was the thing that got me. There was no heat in it, no edge. Just the statement sitting in the air between us, like something that had been there for days, waiting to be acknowledged. I felt my jaw tighten. "I smile at guests," I said. "It's part of Hannah. Just my name. Nothing else." But something in the way he said it, not sharp, not cold, just precise, like a single key turning in a lock, stopped me mid-sentence. I looked at him then. For the first time that evening, directly. He was already looking at me. Had been probably for longer than the moment I turned. His expression was unreadable in the way that I'd come to understand meant the most. Not empty, but controlled. Deeply, deliberately controlled. And beneath that control, in the particular quality of stillness in his eyes, was something that I had no clean word for. Something that had weight. "You did it on purpose," he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact, placed on the table between us with the same quietness he placed everything. My mouth went dry. I held his gaze because looking away felt like losing something, and also because I was terrified of what my face might do if I let myself look away. "Does it matter why?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "It does." The word was so simple, so unguarded, relative to everything else about him. I felt it somewhere in my chest, a small, specific ache, like a bruise being pressed. "I needed to know if you'd notice," I said, before I could stop myself. It was honest in a way I hadn't planned to be. I needed to know if I was imagining everything or if... I stopped, pressed my lips together. Youngjae looked at me. The room continued its low murmur around us. Somewhere near the alcove, 2 men laughed at something. A glass clinked. "You weren't imagining it," he said. 4 words, delivered in exactly the same tone as everything else he'd ever said to me. Quiet, measured, carrying its full weight without needing volume to do it. I breathed in slowly through my nose. Let it out. "That doesn't make any of this simpler," I said. "No," he agreed. And something at the very corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the ghost of the shape. It doesn't. We stood there for another moment, side by side and not touching, while the room moved around us. Then Sue appeared from the direction of the kitchen with a question about the closing sequence. And I turned toward her, and the moment folded itself up and was gone. But when I glanced back at Youngjae as I moved away, one of his security team had repositioned again. Closer to me now, not to him, standing at the natural intersection of my usual path through the room. Not a threat. I understood that. A perimeter. He had put one of his people between me and the rest of the room without saying a word about it, without asking, without even looking like he'd done anything at all. And the thing that should have felt like a cage, the thing I should have recognized as the beginning of something I didn't have a map for, felt instead, God help me, like the first time in years that someone had decided I was worth protecting. I hated how much I wanted to stay inside it. The following week arrived the way certain weeks do, ordinary on the surface, quietly seismic underneath. I went to work. I filed event reports. I ate lunch at my desk on Tuesday and had coffee with a friend on Wednesday evening, and smiled at the right moments, and said the right things, and felt, the entire time, like I was moving through the world with something invisible wrapped around me. A new weight. Not heavy exactly. Just present. The kind of presence that changes how everything else feels by contrast. Denise didn't call about any new assignments. I didn't ask. On Thursday morning, I found a card on my desk. Not an envelope, just a card, cream-colored and heavy stock, placed on top of my keyboard with the deliberate positioning of something left intentionally rather than dropped. No name on the outside. Inside, 4 words in clean, unhurried handwriting. Tonight. Ether. 9 o'clock. No signature. None needed. I sat at my desk for a long time looking at it. My coffee went cold. The office moved around me. Phones, keyboards, Denise's voice somewhere down the hall managing someone else's crisis. And I sat in the middle of it holding 4 words on heavy cream stock and understanding, with a clarity that bypassed argument entirely, that this was the moment. Not the smile at Winnetka, not the conversation at Ether on Saturday. This. Right now. His move, placed in my space, waiting for mine. I could not go. That was the rational choice, and I knew it, and I spent approximately 3 hours making the case for it to myself with the same organized thoroughness I brought to event logistics. He was dangerous. The world around him was dangerous. I was an events coordinator from the South Side with a graduate degree, and a sensible apartment, and a life that was ordinary in all the ways that were supposed to be enough. Whatever you weren't imagining it meant in the language of a man like Young Jae-han, it did not mean simple. It did not mean safe. I went home at 5:30 and stood in front of my closet for 45 minutes. Ether at 9 on a Thursday was quieter than the Saturday event. The same dark wood, the same pendant lights, the same carpets that swallowed sound. But tonight, there was no event to coordinate, no caterer to manage, no Sue walking me through logistics with brisk efficiency. I was just a woman walking through an unmarked door in the Gold Coast in a dark green dress I'd bought 2 years ago and rarely had occasion to wear. The bartender recognized me. He nodded toward the private hallway without being asked. The door at the end was open. The room beyond was small, a sitting room really, with 2 low leather chairs and a lamp that cast warm amber light and a side table with a glass of water already placed on it. Youngji was standing at the far end when I came in, turned toward the narrow window, his jacket off and folded over the back of one of the chairs. White shirt, sleeves pushed to the forearm. I could see more of the tattoo at his neck from this angle, the dark ink spreading down toward his collarbone. He looked younger somehow, without the full architecture of the suit. Or maybe just more real. He turned when he heard me. His eyes moved over me once. Not aggressively, just completely, the way he processed everything. And then he said, "You came." "I came," I agreed. He gestured toward the chairs. I sat. He remained standing for a moment, then seemed to make a decision about it and sat across from me, leaning forward slightly with his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely linked. It was the most open posture I'd ever seen him hold. It made something in my chest pull tight. "I need to tell you something about Marcus Seo," he said. I hadn't expected that to be the beginning. "Okay." "He's been asking about you, to people who know my operation." His voice was steady, factual. Not casually, specifically. Your name, your employer, where you live. The warmth of the room didn't change, but I felt suddenly cooler. Since when? Since the Sterling. He looked at me carefully. He knew you worked my events before he ever spoke to you. The water request was deliberate. I sat with that, turned it over, felt the specific nausea of realizing that something you'd experienced as a spontaneous moment had actually been a calculation you walked into without knowing the math. He used me to get information. He used you to get a reaction, Youngjay said. From me. The information was secondary. And did he, I asked, get a reaction? A pause. Youngji looked at his hands, then back at me. He got more than he was supposed to, he said quietly. Which is why this conversation is happening. The lamp hummed softly. Somewhere beyond the door, the distant ambient sound of the bar filtered through. I looked at Youngji's face, the careful architecture of it, the control that was habitual and deep, and tried to find the thing underneath that he was allowing to surface, just slightly, in this small room with the door open and no security in eyeline for the first time in all the months I'd known him. You moved one of your men to cover me, I said, at the event Saturday. Yes. You've been doing that for a while, haven't you? Not just Saturday. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. You move through rooms full of people who know what I am, he said finally. And you're connected to me by association now, whether you chose that or not. I didn't think it was something I should leave unaddressed. You didn't tell me. No. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because telling you would have required explaining things I wasn't ready to explain. And because... He stopped. Something crossed his expression, brief and unguarded. You were the only person in those rooms who treated me like I was a person and not a position. I didn't want to change that. The silence that followed felt like something living. I was aware of my own breathing, the fabric of the chair beneath my palms, the small distance between us that was not very small at all, and also somehow insufficient. I'm not naive about what you are, I said. I want you to know that. I haven't been constructing some version of you that ignores the reality. I know, he said. That's also part of why I'm telling you this directly, instead of just managing it from a distance. He looked at me steadily. Marcus won't approach you again. That's already been handled. I didn't ask how. Some questions were their own kind of answer. And what about everything else? I said. What about the part where you've had someone watching my proximity at every event for, how long? 8 weeks. 8 weeks. I counted back. That's before anything. Before any of the conversations. Yes. I pressed my lips together, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. That should probably bother me more than it does. Something shifted in his expression. That same near smile from Saturday. The ghost of it. The architecture. Probably, he said. It does bother me, I clarified. It also doesn't surprise me. And I'm not sure what that says about me at this point. It says you pay attention, he said. The same way you always have. We sat in that small room for another hour. We talked, not about his operation, not about Marcus CO, not about the geometry of power and danger that surrounded his entire life. We talked about smaller things. He told me he'd grown up between Seoul and Los Angeles, that he'd spent a year in Chicago before deciding to stay, that he read in the early mornings before anything else began. I told him about the South Side, about the job, about the strange specific pleasure of making a complicated evening run so smoothly that nobody noticed the work. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without interruption, like what I was saying was the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. At 10:45, I said I should go. He walked me to the door himself. His security was in the corridor, and they adjusted their positioning without expression or instruction. At the threshold, he stopped, and I stopped, and we stood in that particular doorway moment where something was either going to be said or wasn't. "This doesn't get simpler from here," I said. My own words from Saturday returned. "No," he said, same answer as before. But this time there was something underneath it. A warmth, quiet and carefully held, like something he'd decided to stop locking away quite so completely. But I'd rather it be complicated with you informed than simple with you unaware. I looked at him for a long moment. At the tattoo at his throat, the open collar, the dark eyes that were still guarded in their depths, but were allowing me, right now, to see that there was something in those depths worth seeing. I thought about 8 weeks of someone watching my back in rooms I'd thought I was navigating alone. I thought about the card on my keyboard, 4 words on cream stock. I thought about a parking garage at midnight, and the feeling of belonging to something I hadn't agreed to. I thought about how I'd walked through that unmarked door tonight, knowing exactly what I was walking into. "Okay," I said, "just that." He nodded once, the way he'd nodded at me that very first evening in the Meridian hallway. Not quite an acknowledgement, and somehow more than one. And then I walked out into the Gold Coast night, and the door closed softly behind me. The city was cool and bright and entirely ordinary around me. I walked half a block to where I'd parked, and I sat in my car, and I didn't try to talk myself out of anything for once. I just sat with it. All of it. The weight and the warmth and the impossible, complicated reality of what I'd just said yes to without using the word. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. A message from an unknown number, just 4 words, the same handwriting translated into text. "Get home safe, Hannah." I stared at it for a moment. Then, for the first time in 8 weeks, I smiled in a room I knew he was watching. And this time, I meant it entirely for him. Some doors, once you walk through them, don't close behind you like exits. They close like the first page of something you're going to need to read very carefully and very slowly to understand. I put the car in drive,